Good evening, guys. Tonight we are going to be talking about nativism in America and how America was affected and essentially became extremely racist after World War I. So our learning target for today, I can explain why nativism existed in America, and also I can describe how groups like the KKK emerged after World War I. So, nativism, first of all, what is it? It's pretty simple. Nativism is just the idea of being biased against anyone who is not a native-born American. Okay, so biased against those who were not native-born. And again, it's one of these crazy things that, well, you know, who really is native-born? We all come from different areas, but again, this is the attitude that emerges post-World War I. Because remember, we want to be isolated. We want to be isolated after World War I. And it's basically America takes up this us versus them mentality. And if you were not one of us, if you were not a native-born American, then you were one of them, then you are the enemy. And so to kind of figure out where exactly we're going with this, we have to figure out what's going on in Russia. So in Russia, there is a revolution that's taking place basically as World War I is ending and as the Treaty of Versailles is going on. And it's something called the Bolshevik movement. And what the Bolsheviks is, it's a group of communists that takes over the Russian government. And so, in the Russian Revolution, the communists take over, and so Russia, which for a short time was a democracy, now converts to communism. And communism, as we've talked about a little bit, is the arch rival of capitalism. So seeing that we are Americans, we are a no-go when it comes to communism, and we are very, very much against communism. So how does this affect us in America? Well, anybody that is perceived to be communist, or also something called an anarchist, they were viewed as the enemy. Now, in particular, in America, this affected labor unions. Why? Because we talked about this a little bit. Labor unions are perceived as communists because what do they want? They want fairness. So, what businesses would do during the 20s is they would accuse labor unions of being communist in order to get people against labor unions. And that was the goal because labor unions are associated with communists. Now, further along the line, this leads us to the Red Scare. And what is the Red Scare? Well, the Bolsheviks were known as the Reds. And so from now on, whenever you think of the color red, you need to think of communism. So the Red Scare is basically just fear of communists. Okay, so by us fearing communists, again, like I said, we go against the idea of labor unions. Labor unions is the big one. But we take it another step further with something known as the Palmer Raids. Okay, the Palmer Raids were led by the Attorney General, a guy by the name of A. Mitchell Palmer, and he sought out anyone who was perceived to be communists or anarchists. And the most famous example of communists or anarchists and the Red Scare was something known as the Sacco and Vanzetti trial. And you guys don't have to write that down because we're going to do kind of a case study on it on Thursday. But the Sacco and Vanzetti trial was the most famous when it came to the Palmer raids and when it came to the Red Scare. Now, immigration during the 1920s in America. Right after World War I, Europeans are flocking to America. And why is that? Because America is stable. Where their countries, which were destroyed by World War I, are anything but. They're very, very shaky. So all these people coming over to be secure, they come over to America and they want to start fresh. So how does America respond to this crazy, crazy influx of immigration? Well, here's how they do it. Immigration is a no-go. And so they set, when I say they, I mean the United States government, sets into place something called a quota system. And in this quota system, only a certain amount of immigrants can come over per country. So I'm going to erase where it says quota system right here. Make sure you guys have that written down, okay, quota system. And we put into play something known as the Immigration Act. I'm going to abbreviate the Immigration Act of 1924. And basically what this says, the Immigration Act of 1924, is that you can only bring, or a certain ethnic group can only have 2% come over per year of those citizens that are already living in America. Okay, and that might sound confusing. So again, I'm going to erase this. Make sure you get down Immigration Act of 1924. I wish I had more room. I should have put another slide in. That's my bad. Okay, so here's what this means. Let's say I am from, I don't know, we'll just say, hypothetically, we'll say the Ukraine. And let's say there are only 100 Ukrainians living in America, or Ukrainians living in America in 1924. That means that only 2 Ukrainians are going to be allowed in America in 1924 because that is the 2% quota. If that's confusing, we'll go over that more tomorrow. Now, let's transition. Now let's go to the rise of the KKK. First off, the KKK stands for the Ku Klux Klan. Okay, and the KKK goes back to this thing that we kind of talked about, the idea of the WASP, White Anglo-Saxon Protestant. And what did the KKK want? Well, what the KKK wanted was simple. I'm taking this from your book. The KKK was devoted to making sure that we were 100% American in this country. So who did the KKK hate? Everyone. If you were not a WASP, they hated you. Black, Catholic, Jewish, from Eastern Europe. They hated everybody. And although it was not as prevalent, lynchings are still very, very common during this time period. Pretty graphic images, but they're images that you guys have to know because this is what was going on during this time period. Now, like I said, lynchings were more prevalent in the early 1900s, not so much in the 1920s, but this is the attitude that we still take. And why do we do this? Why do we still have these fears? Because going back to our learning target, why did Nativism exist? And how did groups like the KKK emerge? Because Americans are afraid. Americans are afraid of change. And the 20s was a period of change. And this is the key point that we have to know. Americans are afraid of change. That's why we looked at the Scopes monkey trial today. That's why we looked at women's suffrage and why so many people were against women's suffrage. That's why people wanted to outlaw prohibition, because they wanted to keep the traditions and the morality of America the same, and they were afraid of change, and that's why we have nativism. That's why we have the Red Scare. That's why we have immigration quotas, and that's why the KKK is able to rise up, because the KKK is all about securing what is traditional America. So, if you can explain why nativism existed in America, which we just did, and if you can describe how groups like the KKK were able to rise up in America, like we just did, then you are good to go. So, I will see you guys on Wednesday, and we're going to be talking about this for the next 2 days, so buckle up, get those notes done, and I will see you then. Have a great rest of your night. Bye.